Welcome back to the Running Wine Mom podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Slinsky, aka the Running Wine Mom. Today, we have a very special episode that will unravel the mysteries of introducing foods to kids and address the challenges parents face during this crucial stage. Joining us today, my guest has dedicated her career to helping children and families navigate the intricate world of feeding and swallowing. Kim Grenawitzke is a renowned pediatric occupational therapist and feeding and swallowing specialist who is the deputy director for a very near and dear program, Solid Starts. She brings a wealth of experience from her work at some of the largest children's hospitals on the West Coast, focusing on neonatal feeding, breastfeeding, and high-risk infants, and pediatric cardiac rehabilitation. Not only does Kim provide valuable expertise to families in hospital settings, but she also extends her support to those struggling with breastfeeding, transitioning to solids, tube weaning, and oral motor challenges. Today, we'll dive deep into her journey, exploring her passion for empowering parents, promoting healthy eating habits, and fostering children's independence during their feeding journey. So, if you're a parent eager to learn more about solid food introduction or facing any feeding related concerns with your little ones, you're in for a treat. Get ready to gain valuable insights and practical tips from Kim as she shares her expertise and some heartwarming success stories. Welcome, Kim.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. And as I was saying, Solid Starts was my Bible for feeding our kids. So I'm so excited to learn just about the whole program a little more and just get the word out to other people. So before we start each episode, we have our wine, and win of the week segment. This is where we share our favorite bottle of wine or drink, vent about something that has been bothering us, and celebrate our recent victory. So grab a glass, take a deep breath, and let's get started. So what is your wine, WINE, of the week?
I am, no matter what season it is, no matter how hot, cold, anything, I drink a nice heavy Cabernet.
That's okay. I love a cab.
I actually just last weekend got to spend some time back in San Francisco in the Bay Area and went wine tasting with some old friends. And so I brought back to the Midwest some really delicious Napa wine. So that'll definitely be on the menu for me this weekend.
Do you have a favorite Napa cab?
So I love Alpha Omega. If anybody is familiar, it's definitely my favorite.
Awesome. And what is your WHINE of the week?
The California girl in me that has recently moved to the Midwest is dealing with yet another humongous random summer storm and power outage. So my toddler is out of school. My younger one is all, disorganized and very dysregulated because the day is not what it is supposed to be. So we're just kind of floating along and making it up as we go along. But I miss my nice routine. That's definitely my wine for today.
How about your win of the week?
Win for the week. The baby is starting daycare and she's taking bottles at daycare. So that is my big win for the week.
That is awesome. Congrats. And I always like to ask my guests, what is one struggle you have overcome leading to where you are now? And what is something that you are most proud of in your life?
Gosh, this is a tough one. I feel like, as many people listening here, we're probably all reparenting ourselves a little bit and thinking about how our parents influenced how we react to our own children. And I knew that there was always an interesting relationship with my mother and I, but I didn't really dig into the depth of it. And I've recently been doing a lot of work with an amazing therapist to kind of unpack a lot of that. And I don't think I realized how much it really impacted a lot of my life until now. And I'm very happy that I'm taking the time and for myself to learn more about that and to be a better human being and a better parent. And one foot in front of the other, but I think making really good progress of just being like I said, a better human. And I'm really thankful for that.
That's awesome. Congratulations on your progress. And that is just something, in parenthood in general, my husband and I talk about it a lot. It's like taking the good and the bad from your childhood and just like trying to make it all better for your kids, which
absolutely
is most important. So this is the Running Wine Mom. So we start a little bit of fitness, a little bit of parenthood, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of everything. But for fitness, what is your favorite way to stay active?
Right now, it's chasing a toddler. Pre-kids, I used to love to run. I was a half marathon kind of person. It felt like the good length or the good, distance for me. Really loved to train. It was a really great way to get my energy out when I come home from the hospital after a long day. I have not prioritized taking care of myself like I should post kids. And I recently have started learning to play tennis.
Okay.
Our next door neighbor's son is a recent high school graduate, and he was a high school tennis player. And so he's taking me out to the high
Oh,
school and
fun.
teaching me to play tennis. So it's giving me a reason to spend an hour on myself and run around and work on hand-eye coordination, which is a lot harder as an adult than it ever was before. But I feel like that's my first step into getting back into taking care of myself. I also used to love high intensity interval training. I loved Barry's boot camp. So if anybody is a Barry's person, where I live now, they unfortunately don't have one, which is really a bummer. But I'm hoping to just get my body moving a little bit more on a regular basis and then get back into running.
So what are your struggles right now that are keeping you from staying in the realm that you'd like to be in?
Prioritizing sleep.
Mm-hmm.
We neither of my well, I take that back. My toddler is not the greatest sleeper. She never has been, so she's still up a lot at night. So we're just tired, and the baby still nurses a bit at night, and so just not getting good chunks of sleep. So when I do have a little bit of time to myself, I'm using it, checking out, reading a book, or
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of really dirty, awful romance novels on my Kindle. So if I can just like crawl in bed and read for a little while and check out, I'm doing that instead of taking care of, moving my body, even though I know that if I did move my body, I would probably feel better overall. So trying
Yeah,
to
but yeah, your
swing.
romances are just what book are you reading now? Anything
No,
extra?
I actually just finished something, and I'm reading some parenting books. I'm reading The Emotional Life of the Toddler.
Oh, okay. I'll add it to
Uh,
my list.
yeah. And then The Highly Sensitive Child are the two that I have open right now. So I do have to flip flop between the crappy books and then the things that,
Yeah.
I use for work and for my life.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I kind of go like it's like I'll do in the summer. I don't like read or listen to any sort of like informational books, but in like the winter and stuff, that's I feel like when I really get to that now. It's like beach reads
Oh,
and
totally. Yep.
What do you wish you learned earlier in life about your fitness and nutritional health?
I wish that I knew that my body did not like sugar. Everyone, I think once you become a real adult, you kind of start to figure out what it is in your diet that makes you feel cruddy.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's definitely sugar. And it's very easy for me to overload on sugar, especially when I'm not sleeping well and I've got two
Mm-hmm.
kids running around in the house. And I notice that when I'm at my lowest, I'm like, popping the cookies and the like Starburst gummies and all the little like random sweets that add up and add up and add up. My husband and I are known to make 4 break and bake cookies every single night after the kids go down. So we can each have like a couple cookies before bed. But it's definitely, I wish I would have known how sugar really was not the best for
Mm-hmm.
my body, and I maybe could have developed some other I don't want to call
Habits.
it a coping mechanism,
Yeah,
but other
that's what it.
habits.
Yeah, like comfort.
Totally comfort
Yeah,
food or
yeah.
comfort thing.
And what do you think the relationship between mental health and physical fitness is?
Oh gosh. I think it's so connected. Even just, this is probably going to tie us into a little bit of my OT work, but as an OT, like the whole basis of our profession is when you participate in occupations or things, your brain is in such a better place. And that's so very true. Even just outside of rehabilitative kind of settings, just when my brain is engaged and active, I feel better.
Mm-hmm.
I've even been trying to just be the one that takes the dog for the walk,
Mm-hmm.
which is what, half a mile around the neighborhood, but it's still like
Something.
getting myself moving, and it helps me get dressed in the morning. Like
Yeah.
I actually put on clothes to get out of the house to move. And I've noticed that I can be so much more productive when I do that. But it's a little bit of a brain thing about just prioritizing taking care of
Yeah.
yourself like that.
I totally agree. Yeah. So once you I feel like once you move, it's good, but it's the
Getting
getting to
there.
move is hard.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get a little into the parenthood. Tell us about your family. You have 2 children.
Yeah,
And
so I've got two girls. My oldest, Maeve, will be 3 next month. And
oh,
then my second little one is 9 months, Blythe. And my husband Will is a corporate development kind of like financy kind of guy. And we moved to the Midwest about, gosh, it's almost 2 years ago now to be closer to his family. And so Minna and Bop Bop, as Maeve calls them, but Grandma and Grandpa live about an hour away, which is great. They can be really involved.
mhm.
And I can't forget our first child. We have a 8-year-old golden retriever
Oh,
who is the first girl of the family, who is probably not getting as much attention now as she would want. But she's the perfect family dog who's just amazingly lazy and the
oh,
sweetest with the kids, and also helps clean up all the food that the baby
yeah.
drops on the floor.
That's so important too. Yeah, so you're kind of in the same season that I am. My oldest is 2.5, and my youngest just turned 1. So I
Yep.
totally get
Whew, it is
it.
a busy, like, it's funny when you meet other parents that have passed that phase. They
Mhm.
look at you and you tell them your kids' ages, and they're like, oh, you're in it right now.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
like in it.
yeah. That's they're both napping right now. And we're down the shore right now. At, for the week, so it's just been like nonstop. Like with them on the beach, it's no longer just like reading a book. You're like
Mm.
running after them, and it's like, all right.
Yep.
To this morning, we went to the zoo instead, so we're like, it's too busy.
Yeah.
We'll go later today.
It's like parenthood is so overstimulating at this point in our
Yes,
lives.
for sure. What do you think you were least prepared for in parenthood?
um, what is the thing I'm the least prepared for? Probably managing my own sleep deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was prepared for staying calm during tantrums, and I was prepared for obviously the feeding stuff, and I was prepared for diapers, and like, because I lived in the baby and the
Yeah,
kid world for so long, but I didn't realize how cranky and explosive I get when I'm tired. And I
yeah,
have found myself in the middle of the night being like, oh my gosh, she's scared. Just take a deep breath. If you were scared, would you want someone to yell at you right now? But it's hard.
it's hard.
I did not prepare myself for even just balancing out, being like, okay, I got to check out now because
Right.
I'm spent. Like, get my husband on board. I was not
Hmm.
prepared for that, like, teamwork, I guess, when
Teamwork.
it comes
Yeah,
to sleep stuff.
yeah. What do you think your parenting style is?
We have, if you want to go really official, we're really big on authoritative parenting.
Hmm.
So lots of boundaries, but lots of empathy at the same time. We let both of our kids make mistakes, and we help guide them through those mistakes. And we set pretty firm boundaries. And especially, well, we can talk about this when it comes to eating, but like, we make one meal for the family. And if you don't want
Hmm.
to eat it, that's cool. We are
Hmm.
not the kind of family that brings other food out. Um, we're also the kind of family that supports the big feelings and allows the tantrums to happen. And yeah, it's exhausting, but there have been times where I've, scooped Maeve up and carried her out of the grocery store, and we've sat in the car and, screamed it out for a little while.
Hmm.
And then we're the type of family that works through it afterwards. And I think the biggest parenting win for my husband and I is that we've been really, really good at repairing when we've screwed up.
Hmm.
And we all screw up, right? We
Hmm.
yell, we say things we don't want to, and we've been really focused on trying to express, like, that's not how I wanted to react, and I'm sorry I said that, or I
Yeah.
wish I would have done this better. And so far our daughter's really reacted well to that. So I'm hoping that we're showing her that we're people that make mistakes and apologize.
Yeah, I've a lot of moms that I've talked to and dads, that's like what they want to do too, is they just want to admit when they've done something wrong as well. So the kids don't feel like making a mistake is the end of the world. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that's really important for them. And that's what I'll say to Willow. I'll be like, I was just really frustrated that, like, how you get frustrated, I get that way too. And, just working through it. So, what's one piece of advice you would give to other parents?
Take a deep breath before you say anything. I
Yes,
feel
that's
like so my I don't want to use words I'm not supposed to use on a podcast, but my husband and I always talk about your shitty first draft,
yeah.
you know,
No,
and what
yeah.
and what you I think that's a Brene Brown term if you're familiar with her, but the thing that you want to say first is always not the thing that you really want to communicate, whether it's with your partner, your kids, your in-laws, whoever it is. And so I feel like if all of us could just take a deep breath before we reacted or responded, we'd probably all be kinder to each other.
I love that, just to kind of like regulate your nervous system.
Exactly.
All right, so let's get into it. You have a wonderful resume. You are a pediatric OT, a feeding and swallowing specialist, a lactation consultant, and as mentioned, work with Solid Start. So let's start with pediatric OT. Working with children can require a unique approach. How do you tailor your therapeutic interventions to ensure they're engaging and effective for your young clients?
Yeah. So the last, I would say 10 plus years of my career, I've worked primarily with infants, teeny tiny babies. And when it comes to engaging with the baby, my number one job is to engage with that caregiver, whoever it may be, whether it's a mom, a dad, a adoptive parent, a grandparent, and and acting as if the parent, because they are the expert in their child, and helping that parent tell me the things that they know about their child. Like, my baby loves that pink blanket. Amazing. Let's wrap them up in the pink blanket. Or my baby really likes to be held up on my shoulder. Okay, great. Let's use that as a position before we start whatever we're going to do. When I worked with older kids or in more in less baby specific settings, it was always a child-directed, child-led kind of therapy environment. So I might walk in with a plan of, we need to work on X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to let the child decide what they want to interact with first. And I'm just going to kind of slowly squeeze in my goals at the same time, which is one of the beauties of OT in general. Like, the whole idea is that if somebody were to be watching from the outside, it just looked like they were playing.
Right.
But I've positioned the toy in a way that's getting the goal, getting at my goals, or I've, set up the environment to have them visually scanning in a way that's working on their visual perceptual skills or something like that.
And it's kind of the opposite of OT, but we're in a language development study with Princeton University for our youngest to kind of see like how that develops. We have like video cameras in our house going all the time, which is like crazy. And I'm so excited, to see the results of it. But similar to you, it's just like observation in, their natural habitat, I guess. But for the OT part, and I'm a health and phys ed teacher too, so I'm so intrigued in like all of that and the younger movements too. So at what age do you think it's important for parents to like recognize milestones that like they need the help, like earlier intervention? I know some people are scared of it, some people like would rather it. How do you kind of help parents?
Gosh, it's so hard because there's so much milestone anxiety out there, right? And even me, with my first Maeve, she was born a month early for some pregnancy complications that I had. And I was like watching her like a hawk. Oh my gosh, she's not sitting exactly how I want her to be sitting right now. She's not crawling yet. And she's fine. She's a very happy, running, jumping, active 3-year-old who's meeting all of her developmental milestones in the way that she should. And I also understand the fact that like I can look at her and know that she's going to get there because of my job. I can totally see as a parent with no exposure or experience with this, like it's really, really nerve-wracking. But what I tell families typically is, if you're worried, get early intervention. Worst case scenario, or I guess best case scenario, they come in and they say, you know what, your baby looks great. Don't worry about it. We'll check in 3 months. And on the other hand, maybe they start doing some work with you, whether it's physical therapy, speech therapy, or some OT, and they do some work with you and your baby. You learn some really great skills, and then your nerves can be, you can be less nervous about it. I can't tell you how many kids we've discharged from the hospital with early intervention services. And then the parents follow up later and they're like, I was so proud of my baby because the therapist came and said that everything looks great. And that makes everybody feel good.
Right.
And there's such a benefit to getting in there early. So if you are, for any reason, if you're like, I just feel something is off here, just have somebody take a look. There's never any judgment. I've been an early intervention provider. There is never any sort of like, we're never looking at a parent we're never looking down on a parent for getting early intervention involved. Babies all develop on their own timeline, and some of them just need a little help. And if we can provide education to the parent to be like, all you have to do is put more toys on the left side. Like simple little things like that can make such a big difference. Or instead of having them sit like this, let's have them play like this. Like huge things or small things can make such a huge difference at that age. So I'm always a big proponent of just get involved. Most early intervention services are completely covered by the state. And so they may have long wait lists to get involved in the programs, but I would always encourage just like ask the question, get somebody out there to help. It's completely self-referred. You don't have to have a physician referral. Reach out if you need it.
So were you originally like in school for OT and then added in feeding and swallowing specialist? And
yeah. So my master's degree is in OT, and my first job was in a very large children's hospital in Southern California, and a large amount of my patient population was all kids with feeding issues for a variety of different reasons. Some that were in the hospital because they had surgery, and so they were recovering swallowing function. Others were in the hospital because they had diagnoses that made them feel sick all the time, and so they didn't want to eat. So it was more of kind of like a picky eating, oral aversion kind of thing. So because my caseload was just so heavy in the feeding world, I started taking extra trainings and extra coursework, which brought me to kind of fall in love with this area of practice. And it's one of the things that we all do multiple times a day without thinking about it. And I think the most like mind-blowing moment for me that it was like, oh my gosh, I have to work in this area, is I was working in a group program for some kids that had they had surgeries on their bowels as infants. So as toddlers, they didn't have all of the digestive capabilities as a typical toddler would. So a lot of them needed to have feeding through tubes and things like that. And we were asking the kids questions like, oh, what do you do at a birthday party? And they would talk about singing, and they would talk about, petting zoos and face painting and yada, yada. We'd say like, what do you eat at a birthday party? And so they would just kind of like, huh. And they would look at each other and they just kind of weren't really sure how to answer that question. And that blew my mind. Because eating is like such an important part of every celebration and every memory of a big celebration for me. So it just very much lit that fire of like, no, I want kids to love food. I want kids to connect over food. Like I love sitting at the table at night and asking my toddler about the random stuff she did at school, even if half of it makes no sense. I still just love hearing about it.
No, it's important. It's so important. It's like such dinner table talk is like such a big part of it was for me growing up, and I feel like for so many families, and that's what like you just relate the food to like the happiness you're surrounded by.
Absolutely. It's like you smell something, you're like, that reminds me of my grandma's kitchen, and that brings me back to this moment of baking cookies with her or whatever it is. And so that very much like quickly made me realize that was an area of practice I just loved so deeply. And the more I got into working with the littler babies, it made it very clear that lactation was such a big part of that too. And so my additional training in lactation kind of like just roped everything together. And even if there's, I've worked with a lot of babies that either weren't safe to nurse or they had swallowing difficulties, but there was such an amazing, beautiful moment of getting that baby with that parent and sharing that experience, even if there wasn't like full milk transfer and eating, but just being able to snuggle that baby at the breast and have that experience. It's a really, really wonderful part of my job.
Yeah, I remember with my oldest, I had some issues with like I had to meet with a lactation consultant, and there was like this awesome moment where it like latched and all came together, and literally there was like 3 or 4 nurses coming in like, oh my gosh, this is like amazing, you're doing, it was, I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing great, but they were just as happy because they got to see that. So I'm sure that it's probably so nice, when you get to see the connection.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
What are some of the most common feeding challenges you encounter, and how do you address those?
So in my old clinical life, because I technically have like retired from patient care too, because I'm doing full-time solid starts at this point. But in my clinical work in the hospital, the majority of kids that I worked with had either swallowing difficulties because they had surgery. So like a baby that has had a surgery may have involvement in their the nerves that control swallowing. So we have to rehab, helping them be able to swallow better. Or we have kids on the flip side that don't want to eat because of different medical issues. On the outpatient side or the non-hospital side, you can see things like trouble with chewing, spitting a whole lot, not being able to move the tongue around to move food around, only liking certain types of foods or certain textures. So that's like that severe picky eating where they'll only eat things that are brown, or they'll only eat one brand of chicken nugget, in one color box, that kind of stuff, depending on the severity. And in the in-home, like more like not really diagnosis kind of population, you just see like regular toddler pokiness around food, which you and I are probably both going through right now. And that is really, really fun for me because it's just developmental. It actually has nothing to do with the food. It has to do with how their brains are learning about communicating what they want and what they don't want, and disappointment. And sometimes even just saying, like teaching a family to say something like, that's not what you expected, is like mind blowing for the toddler. They're like, oh yeah, you're right. That isn't what I expected, but okay, I guess this isn't so bad. So that's kind of within the regular, like typically developing toddler world. And in the typically developing baby world, we just see babies that are maybe not engaged with solid foods. They really aren't interested. Sometimes we need to work on balancing hunger for them. Like they're beautiful breastfeeders or beautiful bottle feeders, and they just fill up on so much milk that by the time that, they get to the table, they're like, I just am not hungry for this at all. So helping kind of balance out schedules. What other kind of things? There's a lot of little random pokey things, like babies that spit all their food out and never swallow it. Babies that don't want to touch sticky foods, or they don't want to use a utensil, stuff like that. So it really kind of can cover like basically anything that touches food. We probably can treat it.
Yeah, my daughter is definitely in the like if something's mushy or like not a perfect texture, she starts like gagging when she touches it, and I'm like, okay, whatever.
Oh jeez.
So with like feeding, and if they're not feeding properly and they're like not getting, and kids aren't getting their proper vitamins and they're hungry, like what do you think the link of that with mood and behavior is, and how can you help that?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting topic because there's definitely a deep dive on like nutritional deficiency and sleep, and like iron deficiency impacts sleep. But then there's also just that if your kid is hangry, of course they're going to have more meltdowns. They're not going to be able to regulate as well, because when your body is telling you that you need something, but your child doesn't fully understand how to meet that need,
right,
they're not going to be able to maintain their own balance in their body. So we definitely do a lot of work with families about helping kids, especially toddlers, listen to their body a little bit more. It's called interoception. So this idea of, how does your belly feel right now? Does your belly feel full, or does your belly feel empty? Does your belly feel just right? I love using little water bottles, and I'll do like a little animal or a bear or whatever their favorite character is, and I'll cut a circle out so it looks like their belly, and I'll put them on the water bottles, and the kids can fill the water bottle up to demonstrate like this my daughter loves Pete the Cat. I don't know if you guys do Pete the Cat in your house.
No.
It's a book series. She just loves Pete the Cat. So we can have like 3 different little Pete the Cat bellies. And so she can fill up Pete the Cat's belly to make it look like, what does his belly look like when it's full? And she can take a whole bunch of Cheerios and fill that jar up.
Wow.
And then what does Pete the Cat's belly look like when it's not full enough, when it's empty? And she'll put like 1 Cheerio in. And then we can try to use those to help her understand, like, if your belly is, I wonder if your belly's feeling empty right now, and that's why we're having a hard time doing whatever. So I definitely, especially in the toddler world, have a huge practice, or like really do see that happening and work a lot in it. When it comes to the littles, the babies under a year, my number one thing anytime that parents are concerned about sleep or behavior is milk feeds. Like, you've got to be focused on your breast and your bottle feeding at that point. The solid foods are not what's going to do it.
Right.
Even if your baby was eating a ton of solid food, it's not complete nutrition. The complete nutrition is coming from those milk feeds. So if you're ever concerned about, especially your baby's sleep or behavior, focus on those milk feeds, make sure they're getting a full tummy from that, and that the table food is all just cherry on top.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. The full thing, because that, again, my daughter has that. She'll just all of a sudden get like just totally out of her own normal personality, and it's like she's definitely probably hungry. But I'm gonna try that with the Cheerios, filling that up. That's such a good suggestion.
And I think we should all, as parents, we need to be more explicit with how we communicate these things to our kids, because they don't know. So she's clearly hungry, you know it, but she doesn't have the language to put to the feeling. So even saying something like, I wonder if you're hungry.
Right.
Like, I wonder if your tummy is needing food. You know, I wonder if you're grumpy because you're hungry. With my very poor sleeping toddler, we say things like, I wonder if you're grumpy because you didn't sleep last night. that one's not connecting.
Like, huh, yeah. Maybe, but I'm probably just not going to sleep anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
How has your role as a mother like influenced your role in work? I know there's a lot of people who, for example, I have a friend who's a speech therapist, and she's like, I can teach kids how to speak all day long, but when it comes to my own kids, I have like kind of a different approach to it. I mean, do you find that, or do you practice what you preach in the way in your own home?
When it comes to eating, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
My husband actually jokes, especially when it comes to like sleep or other things that I struggle with the kids. He's like, why can't you look at that in the same way that you look at eating? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't do it. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to the things that we talk about, like serving the family meal, not short order cooking, setting your child up for success, we do practice it pretty much to a T. If anything, we are probably more lax on some of the safety stuff, as we should be, which, full disclosure, I would never recommend to anybody, to do. But yeah, we pretty much like carry over this feeding stuff to a T. I think the only thing that was not only thing, but definitely something that was a struggle at first for me was when my first was born, and she was late preterm and just like very disorganized and struggled with breastfeeding for the first, 4-6 weeks. And I am a lactation consultant. I know what's going on. I know how to fix this. And I still, like, in my postpartum emotional, hormonal, I just couldn't. And I was very lucky that Carrie, my counterpart at Solid Starts, is also my best friend and my kids' godparents or godmother. And so she would be on FaceTime with me, like walking me through the things that I knew, but my brain just like couldn't get out.
And sometimes you just need that extra, like, okay, yes, I know how to do this, but like I just need someone else to tell me how to, because you're already like concerned about so much other stuff, your brain just can't like comprehend.
Exactly.
So in regards to lactation consultant, how do you think breastfeeding ties into the introduction to solid foods for infants and young toddlers?
So one of the things that we see a lot is that, first of all, breastfed babies or kids, they're babies that are offered breast milk, a lot of times have a little bit of a more expansive palate. And I'm not saying this in any sort of like shamey or judgy way. This is just a science thing. Breast milk is different based on what you eat and drink. So the flavors of your breast milk actually change based on your food intake. So babies that are given breast milk, even small amounts of breast milk, are just exposed to more flavors before they start solids. There is some research out there that's starting to say that those babies might be more open to trying different flavors than babies who aren't breastfed or given any sort of breast milk. Does this mean that if you're formula feeding, your baby is doomed? Absolutely not. And the cool thing about our bodies is that there are always like multiple layers of checks. Babies swallow amniotic fluid in utero. Amniotic fluid also tastes like all the different foods that the pregnant person is eating. So
I never knew that.
Pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they actually had studies where they had pregnant people eat like tons and tons of like carrots, like stupid amounts of carrots. And then those babies ended up like showing more of an affinity for carrots when they started eating solids. So it's like even things like that. Like, again, our bodies have all of these like multiple checks in. So that's one kind of like lactation-y kind of thing that goes into solids. But then the other thing that we see a lot too is that breastfeeding on demand is so awesome because like baby doesn't eat, you just, nurse them. You could
Right.
always bottle feed on demand too. There is no reason you can't do that. But we do see sometimes in our older kids, so like 12, 18, even 2-year-olds that are still nursing a lot. Sometimes that gets in the way of eating. I nursed my first daughter until 2. I'm one of those extended breastfeeding type people. That worked for us. It does not work for everybody, but there were times where I had to say like, this like nursing's not available right now because it's dinner time, because otherwise she would just skip dinner and only nurse.
Okay.
So there's definitely sometimes a little bit of a boundary that you have to set a little bit around nursing in solids, which can totally be the case for bottles too. But a lot of times those toddlers are already off bottles and they're maybe still doing an extended nursing. So those are just kind of 2 things that we do see frequently when it comes to breastfeeding and solids and eating.
Wow. Yeah, I'm like baffled about the amniotic fluid thing.
Isn't
And
that
I mean,
cool?
that's so cool. Sorry to my kids for all the stuff I ate, but hey, I guess it gave them a better palate, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I want to get into Solid Starts. This is, an incredible resource that you're involved with. The amazing tool. It's just a simple app if you have never heard of it, designed to guide parents on the intro to food. There's also different programs on their website. It focuses on exploring foods through all 5 senses, promoting a diverse and nutritious diet. I use this program with both of my children, and again, I just can't even begin to explain how it gave me like such confidence in feeding the kids. I did both of them, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, the 100 foods before one, which was such like I'm a competitive person, and it was such like a good like, okay, what am I going to feed the kids this week, and kind of gave me different ideas. But just in general, the app was just so user friendly. So as we get started into this, we're gonna learn about the ins and outs of the apps, and I'm so excited to talk about it. So I know I explained a little bit of Solid Starts, but why don't you give us a more in-depth explanation of what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Solid Starts was initially started by a parent, a mom, who had a older picky eater, severe picky eater. And when she had her twins, she was like, I want to do this another way. With her first child, she was nervous and anxious to the point of frozen when it came to feeding her son, and she was really really nervous about choking and really really nervous about nutrition, and so she really held him back from experiencing food in a really interactive way. He was spoon fed watery purees for 18 months, I think, maybe even, I think it was 18 months. And he really, really struggled with chewing, with it getting exposed to or being willing to eat other foods. And she went through tons and tons of feeding therapy to get him to where he is now, where he still struggles, but he, can eat so many foods and is doing great. So when her twins were born, she was like, I just want to do something different. And she started researching. And she came across baby-led weaning, or what is, now known as baby-led weaning, which is essentially just the idea of letting your kids self-feed from the beginning. It can be finger food. It can also just be self-feeding with a spoon, or letting them get their hands messy with the purees and putting those in their mouth. So just like letting baby take the lead. So with that, she brought in a whole team of us to help her build Solid Starts. It started with Carrie and I, who are both feeding therapists, occupational therapists. And since that, we have brought in a pediatric allergist, a pediatric gastroenterologist, a dietitian. We have a speech language pathologist. We have editors and food and culture people, and you name it, we've got it covered. So we've kind of like hit every single avenue of what what food is for kids, and we have put together this incredible platform. So our platform has, first and foremost, it has courses and resources for parents. So we have courses on starting solids, courses for dealing with regular toddler eating stuff, courses for picky eating. And we also have guides. So like you had mentioned, the 100 days guide, like we have a guide if you want to know exactly what food to serve your baby for every single day for the first 100 days of their eating. Great, we've got that for you. If you more just somebody that wants ideas of great foods, we've got a guide for that. If you're somebody that's really nervous about allergens, we've got a guide that specifically talks about introducing allergens that was developed by our award-winning pediatric allergist. So we kind of like touch so many different pain points in different ways. Another beautiful, very important part of Solid Starts is that anything that we have is free for a parent if they are unable to afford it. So we have a really, really robust economic need program. All you have to do is fill out a form on our website, and any of our resources are completely free.
That's amazing.
So Jenny always jokes that she never wanted to make an app, and the app has now become like such an incredible thing for parents. And the app is essentially our free food database on an app for your phone. So our database, which is written by a feeding therapist like me or Carrie, the dietitian, the food and culture writers, the pediatrician gastroenterologist, we all look at all these entries, and we look at where the goal is to get every single food in the world into the database. So it can tell you a little bit about the food, whether it's an allergen or not, how to prepare it, and then how to cut it to be safe for your baby at every single age up to 3. And so that's available on our website, but it's now also available on an app. The app's completely free, and you can just be like, what do I have in the fridge? I have strawberries. Great. I'm going to look up strawberries. You look up strawberry, and it gives you a diagram of exactly how to cut it for every single age. And now we have recipes in the app. So if you're like, I have no idea what to cook tonight, you can, it'll pop up something random, or you can look up like I've got pork chops, and you can type pork in, and then it'll bring up recipes for pork, which is super cool. There's also a subscription feature on the app if you're interested, where you can like track things like allergic reactions and, but that's all optional. You don't have to. If you don't want to subscribe, you can just use it as basically the database on the go, which is really, really cool.
I think I looked at the guides before I got the app. I think the app might have came out just around the time that like my daughter was born. But maybe not. I don't know. But it was just like when we were out to eat, I remember like string beans. I was like, I don't know, how do I feed her string beans? And I literally looked it up, and like I would have cut it a certain way, and that's not the way that it was. And that was just it was such a relief to know that like someone was guiding me on how to do it the proper way right at my fingertips.
Yeah. And then we just wanted it to be easy and accessible.
And it is so easy.
And then the other like arm of Solid Starts that we just launched is a professionals facing section. So we're doing continuing education courses for pediatricians and nurse practitioners and feeding therapists and dietitians. And that program is growing every single day. And it's really a dream come true from my perspective of being able to bring this information to the people that need it the most. Because pediatric healthcare providers are asking for and begging for this kind of training. And so we're really happy that we can provide that too.
That's awesome. So how did you get so lucky to be involved as one of the first people?
Yeah, lucky is an understatement. But Carrie and I, the other therapist on the team, we were running a very small Instagram account because we were teaching a lot. So we were, and this was pre-COVID. We used to. We were going all over California and into all over the country teaching on baby-led weaning with kids with special needs, on swallowing, and just doing continuing education courses for therapists. And one of the ways that we would market our courses was through Instagram. And with doing that, we also started being like, there's some really interesting content that we could put together. And it's so funny now that we work for this giant social media platform that our little 4,000 followers that we used to do our content for every day. But our goal was always to not just talk about baby-led weaning or to talk about eating. We really wanted to say, this is why you should do this way, or this is the research behind XYZ, or let's talk about this new study that came out and what this means to you. And so we were really trying to have a evidence-based platform to the best of our ability. And Jenny saw that and said, I'm really interested in this. Like, this is the why behind all of this. I want to talk. And so she reached out to us and we just started chatting, and she was definitely the brains and the know-how of how to get our word to the masses. And she was like, hey, here you guys go. Let's teach, let's be there. Let's show up for now almost 3 million people, which is just amazing.
I looked, obviously I followed you guys forever, but when I recently looked, I'm like, I can't believe they have I can believe that you have almost 3 million followers, but like, what an incredible accomplishment. That's like insane.
Never in a million years did we think that it was going to grow. I mean, I'm sure Jenny had her, like she knew it would, but Carrie and I always joke. We're like, we were just these little, measly little feeding therapists that were talking about loving boundaries
Yeah.
around toddler meal times. And suddenly we're, talking to 3 million people.
Changing
It's crazy.
the whole, because it's, and when you talk to, my parents, they have no clue. They're like, oh, put the cereal in the bottle,
Yep.
and I'm so into like all of that kind of stuff, research and what's the best way to do it. And just finding it, like I said, was just, I had never even heard of baby led weaning until I had my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And and like you were saying, when you feed your family the same meal every night, like 90% of the time we're doing that. We last night went to like a fancy 5-star restaurant down here. Both the kids sat. They had, of course, pasta, but they also had salmon, and like
Mm-hmm.
they're just such, and I truly have you guys to thank for that, because we weren't afraid to bring them out and just give them what we had, and we were able to. And that, they don't like everything, but like,
Right. As none of us do, right?
we had a couple years ago when we were down the shore, we're out with my whole family, and we're giving Willow calamari and like this and that. And this guy behind us turns around. He's like, excuse me, how old is your daughter? And I was like, she's 9 months old. He like turns to his wife. He's like, our grandchild doesn't eat this stuff. What? Why isn't our grandchild eating this stuff? I'm like, well, I use this app.
I love that.
So can you explain, like, for people that may not know, what's the difference mainly between baby led weaning and traditional feeding methods?
So the traditional feeding method is essentially what the Gerber handout that you get from the doctor says. You go through stages of purees, starting with a really watery puree that's basically like the same consistency of milk. It's offered on a spoon and given to the baby, and the baby sucks the puree off the spoon and then swallows it. At some point during the first year, you're supposed to introduce, they like to go to a meltable solid, so something that you put in your mouth, and then saliva kind of makes it soft, so you don't really have to chew it, and then onto smaller pieces of food, and then eventually onto table food. The idea is that baby always has special food from the beginning, and you continue to move through these phases. Baby-led weaning in the purest form is, and if you were to read, don't talk to the Facebook groups because they're going to disagree with me, but if you read Jill Rapley's book, and talk to her, because we have talked to her multiple times because she's on our advisory board. Baby-led weaning is letting your baby take the lead with feeding from the beginning. No matter what the food is, no matter what the consistency is, letting your baby take the lead. So letting them feed themselves from the beginning. The beauty about child development is that around 6 months of age, they're showing the ability to pick up food and bring it to their mouth. So why are we preventing them from doing that? We add the additional component of this, of sharing foods that are important to your family from the beginning, because then you set the habit in your house of making one meal. Like we had enchiladas this week. It was, our dinner story, like I posted it for dinner last night, and my 9-month-old had a little bit of enchilada. My toddler had some enchilada, and we all had enchiladas. Like there wasn't like, I'm making the toddler one thing and I'm making the baby something else, and I'm making my husband and I something different. That works for a lot of families, and that's absolutely fine. That was just something that I didn't have time for in my house.
Right.
And the research does tell us that the sooner your child is in the family meal, the more likely that they'll eat those family foods later on. So baby-led weaning, again, is just baby self-feeding from the beginning, cutting food in a way that their hands can appropriately grasp and bring it to their mouth, and then slowly changing the shape based on what their skills are. So something that tends to confuse people is why we start with baby-led weaning. You start with big pieces of food and then you go to smaller ones, when there's a logic for most people to think like, no, we should start small because that's easier, right? The thing that we know about self-feeding, or that we know about eating in general, is that self-feeding is what decreases choking risk the most. This was actually first developed or first figured out in nursing homes, because when nursing home residents fed themselves, they choked less. And when nursing home residents were fed by attendants, there was more choking. So that's kind of where this whole concept started, and it has slowly moved down into the pediatric literature as well. And so what we know is that babies need to feed themselves. Well, anybody that has a 6-month-old baby knows that the only thing that they can do with their hands is kind of grasp things in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
So food also needs to be big enough that they can grasp it and bring it to their mouth. The beauty of this for a brand new eater is that it provides lots and lots of input to the mouth. So a mouth that's not used to food now has this giant thing pushing and prodding and poking. So the brain's like, oh, I get that. I see that. I understand how to move that. I'm not going to lose it in my mouth.
Right.
As they get older and they develop more fine motor control, we can give them smaller pieces of food. And the theory is that they've had bigger pieces, so their brain's now kind of understanding what food is like, so they're more likely to find that smaller little piece in their mouth, as opposed to a brand new eater with a small piece of food in their mouth. They're like, "What is this? I have no idea how to move it around. I can't find it. My tongue can't figure it out." So typically, it's big pieces of food for our littlest ones. 9 to 12 months, it's more bite-sized pieces, and then after that, there's a lot of flexibility in what you can do after that.
Yeah, that was definitely the biggest like shocker for when we told the grandparents, like, no, you have to give them a big piece of food rather than the tiny one. They're like, but they're going to choke on it. And I'm like,
so that's what
well,
everybody says.
yeah, their esophagus is so small, like it's not going to get lodged in there if it's that big as well, which I feel like is the other thing that I didn't think about. I forget where I learned it from. But
Yeah. So we all have 2 tubes in our throat.
yeah.
One for breathing, which is the one that we worry about when it comes to choking, and then one for swallowing, which is where the food goes. And the breathing tube is about the size of a drinking straw. So it's very small. And we've got tons of protective mechanisms that basically cap off that tube when we swallow. So for something to actually choke us, it has to be small, firm, round or tapered to plug that hole. So like a giant piece of steak is not going to fit in that hole, even if we wanted it to.
We tried.
Yeah. So that's why we avoid things like grapes and cherry tomatoes and things that are like hard candies are one that scare me. And I actually found my 9-month-old pulling off the stopper, like on the door stopper thingy.
Oh, yes.
Like there's a little plastic thing on the end of that. And I saw her pulling that off and I was like, oh, that is terrifying to me.
Yeah.
Because that's like exactly the size and the shape that would not be going, if it were to be going the wrong direction, would not be safe.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So you obviously you have all of these professionals involved and you have an advisory board. How do you ensure that the accuracy and safety information is up to date and for, the parents' comfort to know that?
Yeah. So I think the thing that's updated the most frequently is allergy information, mostly because the allergy literature changes so frequently. This is absolutely not my area of practice, but I know that our allergist just updated the peanut recommendations because I think new research came out like within the last 6 months on peanut introduction. So all of that changed. Anytime something new comes out in the allergy community, our allergy information is updated pretty much real time. We have an in-house tech team. So essentially like Dr. Bajwala can send an email and be like, we need to change this right now. And they can do it immediately, which is super cool. When it comes to the how to cut recommendations, we base those recommendations on, like I was saying, a baby's control, gross motor and fine motor control. And then our experience as therapists in terms of what their oral motor skills can be. When we get a lot of feedback from parents that things are going well or not going well, or we even start playing around with the presentations on our own with our own kids, we will immediately make changes as well. Like, for example, we felt like, I brought up strawberries earlier, but strawberries, like a big, big, juicy strawberry is great. Cutting off the tapered end makes it even safer. So then we updated the recommendations to say, hey, if you want it to be even safer, cut off the end. So we try to update these things anytime we get tons of feedback on a certain food. Or like I said, if I'm playing around with it with my daughter and I'm like, oh, this seems like it would be a little bit better if I did this. And then we'll send that out to our team who has tons of babies themselves, as well as the babies that we have as our quote unquote baby models in our program. We'll say, can you test this out this way and send us a video so we can watch and see how the baby's managing it. So we can literally change it real time, which is amazing.
And I know, as we did talk about the choking aspect, but I know so many of my friends, when they're feeding their babies, they're like, I'm just afraid they're going to choke. Like, how can they get over that fear? Is there any words of wisdom you would have besides the science of it? Because it's like, no, they're not going to choke on this big piece of steak, but they're still scared to give it to them.
Yeah, totally get that. Fear is something that drives so much of what we do as parents, right? I think something that many families So two things. Number one, learn the physiology, learn so you know what's going on, like cognitively. I know it's very hard to ignore what our brain is telling us, even when it comes to taking care of ourselves, right? It's very, very easy to ignore what our brain's telling us. But learn about how babies chew, learn to chew, how babies swallow, how our bodies work, even just from a very simple perspective. We have a chapter in our course that literally goes through the anatomy, just so you can be like, oh, I see. Okay, at least it makes sense. Is it going to look different when my kid's doing it? Absolutely. But at least there's like a seed planted in there.
Right.
The second thing that I think is really, really meaningful for most parents is that the media makes choking seem so much more of an issue than it really is. I am in no way, shape, or form downplaying the fact that a child dying or having severe medical emergency because of choking, I don't want to downplay that at all. That is terrifying, and no child should ever have to go through something like that. But the media will say things like, one child dies of choking every 5 days. That makes you feel like it's terrifying. But if you look at the numbers overall, that means 72 children die a year from choking.
Which in all of the, children that are born, I mean, there's more than that born in 1 hour a day.
Yes, exactly. And they're more likely to, and again, I hate talking about these things because it makes me feel icky inside, but our children are more likely to be injured in a car or, walking down the street. There's just so many things that are more dangerous, but it just seems like we can control this thing about choking. So I think anytime I start to feel a little bit nervous, I like to pull up that choking data and remind myself, like, okay, this is less prevalent than the media wants me to believe. And I'm doing everything I can to decrease risk, in the same way that I put my child in an appropriate car seat and I buckle them in, and they're, my toddler's going to be rear facing until she goes to college. Yeah. And there's only so much we can do to mitigate risk, because our kids have to eat. They can't be on pureed food forever. And so the longer a child gets used to eating purees, the more likely they're going to use those skills to try to eat chewable foods. When you give a baby a puree, they suck it off the spoon and they swallow it, which is the same skill set that they use to drink from a breast or a bottle, right? You don't want them to do that with food. And so the longer we teach them that skill, the more likely it is that they're going to try to do that with food.
That makes a lot of sense.
And our 12, 15, 18-month-olds actually need the nutrition from food. So we want them to have the skills to be able to eat the table food, right? We want them to be able to eat the kale, to eat the pasta, whatever it is we're giving them, because that nutrition is actually really important. So the therapist in me says, I want my kid to practice as much as they possibly can when they are not mobile. They are stuck in that darn high chair. I have full control over the situation, and they have really great protective mechanisms. So let's build as much skill as we possibly can. It's like the balance bike, right? We're like using the balance bike, and when they need to put the pedals on when they're 12, 15, 18 months, I want them to be really, really skilled with the bike before we are required to do that. So I don't know if that helps anybody or not, but those are kind of my like immediate thoughts.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's so, I mean, I, again, didn't even think about the like slurping of a spoon type of that. They're not gaining it's not just going to come to them. They do have to build up no matter how long you wait.
Yeah, totally. There's like this perception that they just like wake up one day and know how to chew. Right.
Yeah. And they definitely don't, but I know and then I think I also read about how like the gagging is similar to like this was like helpful for me. The gagging is similar to when a baby starts trying to walk. They're not just going to get up and walk. They're going to fall and they're going to learn. And that's kind of how the gagging process goes, where it's like they're not choking, but they're learning.
Exactly. And the gag is the body's way of being like, nope, that got a little too far back. You haven't chewed it enough yet. And so it's like that. We like to call it instinctive fumbling, because like they have the instincts to know what to do, but they're also kind of screwing it up. And the gag is there to help them stay safe. It's like just in the same way as like your kid's going to fall off their bike and they're going to fall off. Like my daughter fell off a chair in the dining room this morning. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But toddlers.
Yes.
But like those things are going to happen, and they learn from those experiences. And so the more opportunity we give them to kind of fumble through it and figure it out, the stronger their skills will be. There's some really interesting research just starting. We talked to an SLP, a speech therapist PhD researcher who's looking at chewing skills in babies that were started on chewables early versus later. And she's actually finding some really cool data to show that those kids that were chewing early actually have better oral motor skills later on.
That's so interesting.
It's very, very new and early research, but when she started talking to us, we were like, oh my gosh, please keep us posted. This is so cool to hear.
Well, I wonder if the research that I'm in will find any of that too, because like they're seeing how we're feeding our kids and they'll see how the language develops. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's really
and makes a lot of sense. I will let you know if I hear anything from that.
Totally,
as well. The other thing, a lot of parents say, like before I was involved with your program, was like, you have to introduce a specific food every 3 days, but yours is just allergens, I think like once a week or every 4 days. So how does that, what is the importance of around that, I guess, that you can introduce everything? And
so the old recommendation that was based on no research whatsoever was introduce one new food every 3 days. So, or one new food every week, something like that.
Yeah.
If you do that, your baby's going to get like 30 foods total in their 6 months, in their first 6 months of starting to eat. We know from the literature, the more flavors, textures, consistencies that a baby is exposed to during the early stages of solid foods, the better, or the more likely that they will be to eat things later on. So the research tells us like variety is key. So that idea of waiting those days,
it's like wasted time.
It's wasted time. Yeah. From the allergy literature, we also know that allergies technically can develop at any time, and they commonly get worse with each exposure. So there is like a piece of understanding there of like, oh, you should give something for 3 days because, by the third day you would probably see an exposure. But if you've given it 2 days in a row, you're probably going to see some sort of exposure or like some sort of reaction anyway. And the allergy literature supports the fact that you should be more careful about allergies. The 9 top allergenic foods, those are the things that you want to be very specifically careful about. If you have a family history of allergy, that's actually not the highest risk factor anymore for developing a food allergy. The research is telling us it's severe eczema and allergy to another food. So like if your baby has a cow's milk protein allergy, like you're more likely to have other allergies to other foods. So if you have either of those 2 risk factors, and I think even if you have a family history of allergy, it's worth talking to your medical provider, but talk to your medical provider about how you want to introduce allergies and come up with a plan. If you don't have any of those high risk characteristics, it is recommended by the allergy community to just go ahead and start introducing them. So the recommendation is just to only give one allergen at a time. So like, can you give peanut butter on the same day that you give
steak or something,
steak or blueberries? Absolutely. Yeah. You just don't want to give peanut butter and yogurt together or peanut butter and wheat together. Like you only want to do one allergen at a time.
Right.
You also want to introduce it a few times to look for tolerance. So that could mean like you give peanut butter for 3 or 4 days of that week to keep an eye on it. We also recommend doing those first thing in the morning. So like you have all day to keep an eye on your kid. If I remember correctly, most of the literature says that the reactions tend to occur within the first, most of the time it's 15 minutes, but up to 2 hours. And then there's also this is like a whole other rabbit hole to go down, but there is a diagnosis called FPIES, which is more of like a GI related symptoms with vomiting, like delayed vomiting. It's quite rare, but that would be the one time that you see like a later reaction to a food. So with those allergies, again, you're just not going to pair them together at first. Wait for them to be tolerated. And then, of course, you can give mixed dishes that may have more than one allergen in it after you know that they've been tolerated. Right. So with the few times a week rule, the research is also telling us specifically for egg and peanut that you want to keep those foods in the diet at least 2 or 3 times a week.
Okay.
It can be really, really hard to do that. Like, I feel like it's, like if you're following the 100 Days Guide, we make it specifically so you do those things. But like, I can't tell you if I've done that specifically for my daughter because we just kind of like serve what we're having. So our staff allergist has said, if you can do it once a week, that's great.
Right.
Like the research has always been about doing it 2 or 3 times a week. So that's why that's the recommendation. But if you can do it once a week, that's really great. Like we're doing the best we can, right?
Right.
Like the most exposure.
It's like there's so much. You're like, you have to do all this stuff and
Oh,
add in peanut butter 3 days a
I
week. Come
know,
on.
right? It's like impossible. And not only peanut, but also like tree nuts and
Yeah.
soy and sesame. And
Mhm.
it's so hard. It's just really challenging to get it all in.
So what is the science or the idea behind the 100 foods, and how did you guys come up with that list?
So this is great. So we actually just recently redid our 100 days guide
Hmm.
because of feedback from families, but essentially we as a team, so the medical component, the allergist, the pediatrician, gastroenterologist, the dietitian came up with foods that are really great for babies' growth and development. Like what are the foods that are really high in iron? What has really good zinc? What are our good sources of vitamin D, calcium, et cetera? And they put together a list of foods that they loved. And then from a feeding therapy perspective, we looked at foods that we were like, but what things are going to help develop oral motor skills? Like, can
Right.
we throw in a food teether here so they're really working on moving their tongue around a
Hmm.
lot? And then our food and culture writer was like, but let's think about things that we can throw in a recipe that the
Right.
family would want to eat. So it's not just something special for baby. So that's been super cool. And I think the new guide just came out maybe in the last year, I think it was. We just did all the last updates to it. And anytime somebody comes out with, like sends us feedback about recipes or about things, we take all of that into consideration and compile it. So we are looking at it every few
Uh-huh.
months just to make sure that it is like it's working for people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we kind of did like we took from the list, but also did like random stuff as well. And I
Mhm.
just like I said, I thought it was so cool to like try all the different things.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and yeah, and it just was exciting for them. Like I wouldn't have expected that my 6-month-old would have tried lamb or, ribs and all of that,
mhm.
which is awesome. What is your suggestions for parents with picky eaters? Like can solid starts help with that?
Yeah. So first of all, anybody that has a kid under a year, try to take that out of your vernacular. Like an infant will put the stroller wheel in their mouth. They will put like a dirty, disgusting thing off the
Yeah.
floor into their mouth. Try to remove the idea that your child is a picky eater before 1 year. Under a year, they're just learning. They're
Right.
figuring it out. Try to replace picky eater with the phrase, my child hasn't, or my baby hasn't made a decision about this yet. They haven't figured this out yet. They're learning about this food. Just like try to change that
Hmm.
perspective. Once you get into the 12 to 36 month bucket, you're dealing with a lot of toddler stuff.
Hmm.
Many times it's really easy to think like, no, my toddler's a picky eater. They'll only eat one thing. They may only want to eat one thing, but it has
Hmm.
nothing to do necessarily with the food. It has to do with their brain saying,
Hmm.
I need to tell my mom what I want and how I want it, and I want it now. This is why every toddler parent has probably gotten in a fight over a banana at some point because you did not prepare said banana in the way that their
Yes,
brain told you that it was supposed to
they
be.
needed it.
Or they asked for it peeled and you gave it to them and then they no longer wanted it peeled anymore. So clearly that has nothing to do with the banana and it all has to do with control, right? So most of toddler eating behavior all has to do with boundaries and just learning to set respectful and understanding boundaries and recognize that our toddlers are going to make mistakes and we're going to have to guide them through those mistakes. Like, oh, it looks like you didn't eat a lot of dinner tonight and you're probably hungry. Like, should we go back and get your plate again? Because I wonder if your belly's still empty.
Right.
So that toddler phase most of the time is just toddler brain development. We do have a quiz on our website actually that you can go through and answer some questions to kind of determine if your toddler is just being toddlery or if they're actually showing picky eating behaviors.
Okay.
So picky eating behaviors are taking toddler selective kind of stuff to a whole new realm.
Hmm.
Typically kids that are picky truly feel anxiety at the table. They feel anxious about trying new foods. They feel that new food may not make them feel good or maybe they don't have the chewing skills to be able to manage a food. So they're truly nervous to put that food in
Hmm.
their mouth. I think when parents reframe thinking about picky eating in a way of they're not just trying to be turds, like
Right.
they really are nervous about the food that's in front of them. One of the first feeding courses that I ever took had used an example of the teacher had gone to a really fancy like state dinner in another country, and one of the foods that was served was grasshoppers. And so that she was given a plate of grasshoppers, and she was like, that clicked for me, that this is what, you know, my client, what my child patient, when they're served,
like,
you know, blueberries, they're thinking how I feel about this plate of grasshoppers, right? So if I had something else on that plate that I was familiar with and I could have a piece of bread, maybe I would feel a little bit better about tasting the grasshopper, because at least I know that there's something there that I will eat. So when it comes to managing this picky eating behavior, we approach it very much from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, understanding that this has to do with fear and worry about food, and slowly helping children build resilience around tolerating these changes. So our picky eating program that we have is in our minds, it's practiced over kind of like a 10-week period, but sometimes kids can go through it faster and sometimes they need a little bit more time. But our whole approach is helping kids learn to tolerate change.
Okay.
And also give them the language to say, this is too sour.
Okay.
Or this is like my highly sensitive daughter, my orchid toddler, who's literally can tell you if the like tag in her sock is like touching, you know, not touching her the right way.
Yeah.
Like will not wear a ponytail, like a pony band in her car seat because it like touches her head wrong.
Oh, grazes her.
Yeah, like she will tell me like, there's a little bit too much pepper on this. I'll be like, what? I put like the teeniest little bit.
Yeah.
It's too much pepper for me, mama.
Aww.
So but our program is based on that idea of these kids are just very, are very observant. They can see, they can taste, they can feel, they can understand really the depth of what this thing is. And we're going to help them understand that change is okay. Understand that change isn't going to hurt them.
Right.
And then give them the language to help communicate about the things that are going on. Even if they're really young, even if they're like 3, 4, 5, you can do it. And so we do have that quiz. Most of the time or many times it's just toddler behavior, but we do have a very robust picky eating program too.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So you've told us so much. I know the listeners have learned so much. I learned so much from this. But I guess I'd love to hear if you can share a success story or testimonial from a parent who used Solid Starts and experienced positive outcome of their child's feeding journey.
Yeah, so I want to share one that's a little bit different, but I'm sure this will speak to parents that are listening here. We a baby or a family reached out to us because their baby was really struggling with bottle and breastfeeding and was struggling to gain weight and was really having a hard time. Was refusing the bottle, was only nursing, but even wasn't nursing well, and it was just a really, really challenging emotional experience for the family. The child was about, I think it was 4.5 months, but was actually showing really, really beautiful motor skill and showing some readiness for solids. So we held off until she was a little bit closer to 6 months, but we started guiding this family into how to let baby take the lead and feed herself solid foods that the family was eating. Within 3 or 4 days, this kid was literally diving into food like the mom was in tears. She was so excited. She's like, I never thought my baby would love food. And just giving that little one the opportunity to be in control and do it herself was groundbreaking for her.
Yeah.
And in doing that, she started breast and bottle feeding better because the stress in her own little body went down.
Yeah.
And she's like, I can do this. I got this. And, you know, and mom sends us video and pictures now, and she's almost a year, and she's just this like little happy, you know, just eater that like will go to restaurants and like you're saying, like eat random things at a French restaurant because she has control over it. And it was just such a simple thing to help this mom through. Just let's listen to her and take her lead and take a step back. I think eating is one of those times in parenthood where it's the first time that we have to like take a step back and stop getting, you know, we have to get out of our own way. Yeah. Someone once told me that there's 3 things we can't control from our kids, and it's sleep, eating, and pooping.
Yeah.
So it's like
all them.
Yeah, it's all them. We can never make them sleep. We can't make them eat, and we can't make them poop when we want them to. And they always poop at the worst times,
They
right?
do.
Oh my
We're
gosh.
going through that with Willow now. She like holds it and I'm like,
Oh
oh
God, that's the
God.
hardest. That's
Yeah,
the
it's really
hardest.
hard. We're like, we try to give her like rewards. I'm like, I don't know if this is right, but like, just to make her feel comfortable
Yeah.
doing it. Cause I'm like, I don't know if she just, I don't know, I
Yeah.
guess.
But
But yeah,
it's one of those things. It's like they feel inside their body, they make a choice, like, and no matter what we want to do, like
right.
we can't control it. And so feeding is just one of those journeys where like is the first opportunity for you as a parent to just like take a deep breath, like, and trust your kid, trust your baby. Which I don't think any of us were brought up to believe that we never felt trusted as kids. So,
No.
but it's definitely an opportunity for us to just kind of like let them show off, let them be
Right.
good at what they can do. Like they have so many skills. Like let's take advantage. Let's let them thrive.
Yeah, I can attest. It is so cool to see them really come into their own and like they like certain foods and they're like getting excited about it. And when they're so little, you think they're just so little and they can't do these things, but the reality is like they can. And that's just like, with my experience with Solid Starts, we have all of these things that we have to constantly be thinking about and doing and trying to get right and just trying to keep these little people alive. And the app was just such like a breath for me to just be like, okay, like I don't have to think about all of these things. Like I'm making chicken tonight. All right, how do I serve chicken to my 6-month-old?
Yep.
Let me just look and find out. And like that's just such a gift to parents to give. Like you said with your the family that you just talked about, like the mom was probably didn't even realize how much the stress was like holding on to all of the other things in her life. So
Yeah. And if we can make eating easier for even just one family, we've done our jobs.
well, you did your job with us with two
Oh, I'm
two
so
babies.
glad. I'm so glad. It's like feeding. I know it can feel so stressful, and like our success as a parent like
Yeah.
feels wrapped up in eating. And I mean, part of it is you show up at the pediatrician's office and the first thing they do is they weigh your kid. And so you see their weight and you like feel defined by that. And like like you see your kid eat or not eat, and it's like you feel like that is a reflection of your ability as a parent, and it's so personal.
Right. And it does, it seems like it's a reflection of you, but it's like like you said, you can't control it. It's them. You can't force them to eat these things. And you're not a bad parent because your kid isn't eating.
No, we can just set them up for success and then we let them fly, right? Like there's really nothing else we can do. And like we started this whole talk off with, eating and meals are supposed to be celebratory. They're supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be where we share connection and where we bond and where we learn about each other. And if we can bring a little less anxiety to the table, like we've won. Everybody wins. If we can just show up to the table, like just with a little bit more happiness, I think we've all won.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. You said it perfectly. You didn't even know you were giving your ending speech. It was great. I mean, this conversation, I've been looking forward to this conversation since we've booked it. Like I said, the app and the program has given me such confidence in a mom, and I rave about you guys to everyone. And I know all my listeners will find everything you say just as valuable as I did. So thank you again for sharing everything with us. Your passion for empowering parents and helping children thrive during their feeding journey is truly inspiring. We hope all the insights have provided you, our listeners, with guidance and reassurance as you navigate the exciting and sometimes challenging world of introducing foods to kids. Please make sure to check out all the Solid Starts programs on their website. You can check out their app to help navigate your child's feeding journey. And you can also be one of their millions of followers on Instagram at Solid Starts, which I love following along with as well. Remember, every child is unique and the journey to establishing healthy eating habits can vary. If you have any concerns or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to qualified professionals like Kim or have your child's healthcare provider. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the Running Wine Mom podcast and leave a review. You can also follow me on Instagram at the Running Wine Mom _. Love hearing from everyone. And don't forget to share this episode with your fellow moms and dad friends who could benefit from this incredible resources of Solid Starts. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, you are strong, you are capable, and you are all amazing. Until next time, keep running, keep sipping, and keep embracing the joy of motherhood. Cheers, and thank you, Kim, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
This was awesome.